Hi, everybody, and welcome to the next in our series of In the Frame. And today we are joined by our very own Global Policy Director, Tania Bowers, and we're delighted that she's joined us for a quick fire question session on all things policy. So first and foremost, thank you, Tania, for joining us this afternoon. It's great to have you. And the order of these is really to share with our members. So typically we'll have folks within our trusted partner network, but we thought it would be really interesting to have our very own global policy director to talk to us about this year and also plans for next year. But before we get into that, Tania, give everybody, unless they must be hiding under a rock if they don't know who you are in our world, but for those who maybe don't, could you give us a quick overview of you and your career to date, please?
Thank you. Well, yeah, I'm a lawyer, which is actually pretty handy for public policy because obviously a lot of it's about law in reality. So I started off many moons ago in private practice. I had a very high street full service firm training contract, which was quite a baptism of fire. But I ended up sort of getting into some quite high value niche software litigation around bad implementation of software systems, which was kind of ahead of its time, actually. But that meant once I qualified, I moved into litigation in the city. But what I really wanted, what I felt was I actually wanted to help businesses avoid problems rather than just mop up afterwards with litigation. So I decided to look in-house, and I was really lucky to find the job of head of legal at Computer Futures, which very quickly then became S3. So I was head of legal and then legal director at S3 for 13 years, overseeing the period of the float and a huge geographical and sectoral expansion, as a lot of people in the industry will know. Massive increase in staff numbers and all the complexities and the quite steep learning curve sometimes of opening businesses in many and very different countries. And so when I left there, I genuinely did want some time to spend with my family, and I started my own consultancy. And I already knew APSCo because S3 have always been a member, but then I started helping on the help desk in 2014, I think. And then they wanted to get on board a lawyer. And at 2016, I joined as head of legal and UK policy, which I really enjoyed that job for a number of years. And then it was really busy over COVID and very challenging with the furlough scheme and all this. And at the end of 2021, I then took on the global role of policy director, and Shazia Imtiaz came into the team as the head of legal or general counsel. That's really up to date.
So in that new role, it's still relatively new, 2021. What do you actually do for APSCo Global now? What's your role now?
I think first and foremost, it's kind of having an overarching strategy. So every year having a strategy for each APSCo in Germany, Australia and Asia, as well as obviously the UK. And then really working with the MDs, the managing directors in the region, to see how far we can go with the strategy. And really sharing the learnings of, the benefits of being a global business. And it does really vary. In Australia, there's a Labour government and there's some really, very meaty Labour law that's going through the system. And that's probably less of an issue in the UK and Germany for this year. But I think with the UK having an election next year, that might all change. So I have rep groups. I have groups of members in each area, or the repcom, that feed into policy issues, and then we sort of report back to the UK.
Fantastic. And it's true to say, we know 2023 has been an extremely busy year. And as you've already noted, there's an election kind of around the corner. What are some of the kind of key highlights you would take from 2023, Tania?
I think, I mean, what we're hoping for is a little bit of movement on off payroll in the autumn statement. It's not being confirmed yet, but there might be a set-off, which will certainly assist recruitment businesses in handling, or rather, if HMRC do reevaluate employment status. We did finally get the umbrella consultation, but that's and it was very wide ranging, but I'm afraid that's gone back into the mix. They've received about 90 responses, substantive responses. So there's a lot for HMRC and EEAS to work through. So we're not expecting a response to the consultation for a few months, but certainly the fact that they are now recognising the urgent need for regulation of the umbrella industry, I would say is a win. Apprenticeships and skills, we have really seen some movement on things like local skills improvement plans, investment zones. These are all things that we've been asking government for. However, in terms of the apprenticeship, they talk about modifying the apprenticeship levy and the way the scheme works, but actually the current government seems very wedded to continuing to push through with the apprenticeships as is. But certainly in the last few years, skills and training and our sector has absolutely been top of the agenda for both the Conservatives and the Labour Party. And we have had some really good engagement with Labour over the last 2 years, because as everybody knows from the press, they very much have been courting business. So we continue to go through a period where, because of the skills shortage, our industry, our sector is seen as very critical to the labour market, which means there's a great appetite for engagement.
Yeah, and that's so been evidenced in how many consultation papers you received. They all came along like
Yeah,
buses, I
I
believe.
think there's been 7, 8, or 9. I mean, you can always find something to respond to, whether it's a government consultation, whether it's feeding into the Labour Party, whether it's a select committee consultation on the labour market, whether it's the ICO consulting on AI or on data protection. So you do have to be a bit careful about how many you're responding to. But yeah, this really has, the government in particular have been absolutely pumping out consultations on off payroll, umbrella, holiday pay, and we're hoping to hear more about their response on holiday pay later in the year, this year.
So with all of that in mind, I know you're shaping, as you say, the strategy for next year. Could you give us some insight to some of your plans for next year, Tania?
Well, in the UK, it's certainly as we all know, it is going to be an election year. So our focus is very much on building a strong manifesto of recommendations for all the parties involved in the election, with some very clear, pragmatic recommendations that can be enacted. So we're always going to be focusing on regulation. The Conservatives, I think there's a lot kind of ongoing at the moment, but we'll be continuing the work we've already done with them. They also have brought in a number of private members' bills over the last few months, including one on predictable hours, which affects agency workers, the right to request predictable hours. So we are eagerly awaiting. So that's likely to be something that goes on into the new year. I mean, obviously, looking if it's Labour that forms the government, they've obviously got their promise to introduce an employment bill in the first 100 days. So we understand that actually it's the next few months where Labour are still very open to engagement. And then next year, they're going to be looking inwards really to finalise their manifesto. But there's a lot in there around workers' rights that are reasonably sensible, but there's also some areas of concern: the right to flexible working, day one employment rights. I think on the employment status, we can actually have a win there. We had a round table with Justin Madders, who's now the Shadow Employment Rights Minister, last year, and we were really explaining how would agency workers fit within a model where there are only two employment statuses, either employed worker or genuinely self-employed. And since then, you know, they have kind of rode back on that, and there is going to be a lot of consultation before they actually introduce any changes in terms of status. I mean, it might be a good thing if it's clearer how to be self-employed. You know, the whole area of off payroll and different status for employment rights and taxation might actually, you know, be done away with. But it could obviously also mean that a lot more people end up being put in bogus self-employment. And I think the other issue is around 0 hours contracts. Clearly, agency work is intended to be flexible. It needs to be flexible, for example, in our teaching sector or in our clinical health sector in particular. But I think we need to keep getting the message across that actually there does need to be an exception, you know, or somehow agency work needs to continue to be viable in a sort of 0 hours contract where 0 hours aren't permitted.
So really, ultimately, Tania, you are the collective voice of the APSCos internationally. But you know, if we were just to look at through the lens of UK only, it's bringing together those outsourced members and APSCo UK from a staffing perspective, and being that, you know, collaborative voice between the two and taking those issues to government, which is obviously some of the points you've highlighted. And quite often we think of the two sectors, the staffing sector and the outsourcing sector, as being quite different. And they are in some ways, but actually the needs and wants of those industries to remain flexible, to remain able to service the end user customers is really exactly the same.
Yeah, I mean, I think APSCo, when I'm doing my job, there are a few US, you know, APSCo and OutSource have some USPs. Firstly, we're the only organisation that is actually global in terms of we've got operations, we've got members, we've got MDs, you know, internationally. Also, we're the only organisation that represents the outsourced sector exclusively, so that you are totally focused on the outsourced sector. And likewise, we're the only organisation that totally focuses on placing people into the professional skilled sectors of the marketplace, which is so different. So I find that most of the time the issues are actually there's strength in representing APSCo and OutSource together, actually. And there's so many areas, you know, in addition to the regulation, we talk a lot with government around the sorry about that. We talk a lot about the fourth industrial revolution, although that seems to have gone out of fashion, that word a bit. But the AI, you know, around AI and recruitment seen as a reasonably high risk area and use of AI, well-being, as well as things around skills, apprenticeship levy. We have, you know, there are far more areas of commonality than there are of difference.
Yeah, lots of crossover. Okay, my last question for you, because you've whizzed through my questions. If you could have a superpower, what do you think it would be?
Well, I've got two answers. I think, not that I've prepared this earlier, obviously, but I think firstly, you know, it would be nice in my role in particular to always, you know, if you ask for something to be done, then it shall be done. So, you know, politicians will immediately accept all our campaigns and recommendations for the greater good of the workforce. So that's my first one. But my real one, probably my other one would be that I would quite like, you know, I could imagine flying, and I love flying and I love travel, but to fly like a bird have a bird's eye view and, you know, to be able to get from A to B.
Yeah, and actually,
seamlessly.
if you were flying over those politicians, you could hear what they're why they're rejecting our campaigns and what we're asking them to do, and then put that bit right. Yeah,
exactly. I could get both. It could possibly be a way of getting both. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for giving us a snapshot view of you and your role in APSCo Global. That's really appreciated. If any of our members want to get in touch with Tania and they haven't already contacted her, then that's easily rectified. We can arrange intros across with Tania anytime. Just let us know. And again, if any of our members have something that they're really concerned about or an issue they'd like to raise or talk to Tania about, again, just get in touch and we can make that happen. So yeah, thanks again, Tania. Great to see you, and thanks for sharing with us.
Thank you. Thanks, Mel. Thanks for the opportunity.